starting June 1st, only on ESPN Classic.
Around the turn of the century, Jack Johnson left his job on the docks in his hometown of Galveston, Texas, and jumped a freight train. "I did not know where I was going, but I was on my way," he later wrote in his autobiography. The brakemen and train crews may have called him a bum, among other things, but by 1908, the son of a former slave, a bruising heavyweight, also known as the Galveston Giant, would be called champion. And he did it all despite the rampant bigotry and racism that ruled the sport of boxing and much of the rest of America at the time. Coming up on Big Fights Boxing Hour, Jack Johnson, the best years.
World middleweight champion, Sugar Ray Robinson. He won't be able to do it. It must be the greatest. Now is the heavyweight champion of the world. This is the main event.
Here's Tommy Burns getting himself into the best shape of his entire career. In 9 days, Tommy will defend his title against the scourge of the heavyweight ranks, Jack Johnson. And Tommy knows that this is going to be the fight of his life. Here's champion Burns, the shorter of the two men, training with the fine heavyweight Al Kaufman, whom he sends to the canvas with a good right hand. Watch closely. Johnson is training 17 miles away at Ruschcutters Bay. Even the sedate Australian sports writers have been pulling out all of the stops in describing Johnson's workouts throughout his training period. There has been a general consensus of opinion that Johnson combines perfect defense and balance with an offensive punching attack which leaves little to be desired in a professional fighter.
Hi everybody, I'm Al Bernstein, and welcome to Big Fights Boxing Hour. In this show, we're going back to 1908 for a look at the best years in the colorful career of heavyweight Jack Johnson. Beginning in 1906, Tommy Burns, the reigning heavyweight champion, refused to face challenger Jack Johnson. Not only for fear of losing his title, but also because Johnson was black. Johnson had pursued Burns in North America and in Europe, but the French-Canadian champion refused to take on Johnson. Then, with the help of Australian entrepreneur Hugh "Huge Deal" McIntosh, Burns finally agreed to fight Johnson on December 26, 1908 in Sydney, Australia. At the time, the fight carried the largest guaranteed purse ever, $35,000. Burns would get $30,000 and Johnson the remaining $5,000. Despite being shorter and lighter than his challenger, Burns entered the fight as a 5-4 favorite as he was going for his 12th straight successful defense of his heavyweight title. For this fight, promoter McIntosh himself was the referee. He was also, by the way, Tommy Burns' manager. In short, Johnson had made almost every concession imaginable to get a shot at the title. For the results, let's go to Ruschcutters Bay Arena in Sydney, Australia, and take a look at Tommy Burns versus Jack Johnson.
Electric excitement has captured the fans as they prepare to watch Burns make the 12th defense of his heavyweight championship. This is how Tommy Burns appeared as he was introduced as the defending heavyweight champion of the world. Never was a champion more ready to defend his laurels. In round one, Tommy Burns, to the left of your screen, moves out and boxes cautiously. Johnson clinches with Tommy and smiles to ringsiders. Burns looks almost like a little boy compared to the 212-pound challenger. But while he's not a heavyweight by the normal standard of height, there have been 50 professional heavyweights, mostly over 6 foot tall, with all of their height lying horizontal on the canvas, knocked flat by this same Tommy Burns. Johnson lands a hard right and forces Tommy to the ropes. Johnson rushes in and scores with a punishing left at the end of round 1. In rounds 2, 3, and 4, Johnson merely played with the heavyweight champion. He would laugh and actually talk to the crowd as Burns was hitting to the stomach. It was Johnson's way of demonstrating he had absolutely nothing to fear from the little heavyweight champion. Here in round 5, Johnson has no trouble in tying his man up. Jack Johnson was born in Galveston, Texas on March 31st, 1878. At 30 years of age, he's 3 years older than champion Burns. Johnson is 6 foot 1½ inches tall and weighed in for this fight at a beautifully proportioned 212 pounds. Burns stays at long range, looking for an opening. Early in his professional career, Johnson was nicknamed Little Arthur. He looks almost like a giant next to the little man he's facing. As we come to the end of round 5, it's apparent that Burns is almost at an insurmountable disadvantage against this magnificent fighting machine, Jack Johnson. In rounds 6 and 7, Johnson scored heavily on the inside with ripping punches to the body and hard rights to the head. Here in round 8, Johnson rushes in and holds Burns as he talks to ringsiders, laughing all the time. Johnson has been after this heavyweight title fight for over 2 years. He hurled challenge after challenge at Burns to no avail. Johnson employed the unique strategy of purchasing a ringside seat at every one of Burns's title defenses. As Tommy fought, Johnson would sit there screaming insults, taunting the champion. His high voice stood out like a beacon light at ringside when Burns fought Philadelphia Jack O'Brien. At Dublin, when the champion beat Jim Roach, Johnson was there screaming. Again in Paris, when Burns knocked out Dewey Smith, and finally in Sydney, when Burns disposed of Bill Squires. It was then, in Sydney, Australia, that the champion could take no more. Burns simply can't do anything on the inside with this bigger, more powerful challenger. Tommy Burns' real name is Noah Brousseau. A French-Canadian by birth, he was born June 17, 1881 in Hanover, Canada. A good right uppercut. Another ripping right uppercut by Johnson. Uppercuts, hooks, all punishing blows. Johnson calmly looks down at Tommy, talks to the champion, taunting him. He wants Burns, as well as everyone, to know that this is no fight, this is a picnic. See how Johnson practically ignores the champion on the inside at the end of round 8.
Jack Johnson was about to change boxing history. when we return the conclusion of Johnson versus Tommy Burns on Big Fights Boxing Hour.
ESPN Classic.
In rounds 9 and 10, Johnson simply overwhelms the champion. Going into round 11, it looked practically hopeless for Tommy. Johnson pressing forward, landing short punches, holding Tommy in the clinches. Burns unable to do anything against the heavier, stronger, taller challenger. Johnson turned professional 11 years ago in 1897. He had 10 professional fights when in 1901 he was KO'd in 3 rounds by Joe Shawensky. But following that contest, Johnson KO'd 25 opponents in the next 7 years. He has met and defeated all of the great fighters of his time, including George Gardner, Sam McVie, Joe Jeanette, Sam Lankford, and the great Bob Fitzsimmons. Johnson closes in, completely tying up the champion. He forces Burns back in the clinches and literally handles the champion with ease. As round 11 comes to an end, there is almost a general feeling of compassion for the impossible task which Burns has undertaken. Round 12 was all Jack Johnson. In round 13, it appeared as though the police were going to step in and stop the fight as a result of Burns' weakened condition and the terrible beating he was taking. Here in round 14, Johnson rushes in, lands an uppercut, 3 left hooks, a tremendous barrage of punches, lefts and rights which have Burns helpless. At this very moment, in the early seconds of round 14, the police shut off the motion picture cameras and stepped into the ring, awarding the heavyweight championship of the world to Jack Johnson. Here, in slow motion, you can see the blistering attack. Burns was absolutely defenseless, just seconds before the police stopped the motion picture cameras and entered the ring to halt this very one-sided fight. Jack Johnson becomes heavyweight champion of the world, December 26, 1908.
While the local gendarmes stopped the fight and the cameraman, Burns' manager-referee conceded it was indeed over. On the day after Christmas, in New South Wales, the world had its first black heavyweight champion. The Johnson-Burns battle had been witnessed by some 30,000 fans, including a large press contingent that flocked to Sydney from all over the globe. Though it had ended in the 14th round, the bout was scheduled for 20, and Johnson could have gone 6 more. Burns, on the other hand, was lucky to survive the 13th round, as he saw his 3-year defense of the title come to a halt. Burns would fight only 5 more times before retiring to run a tavern in the Pacific Northwest, where he eventually became an evangelist. Johnson would later call this fight the easiest and most important of his career. The official ruling was a TKO victory for Johnson. Then, as white supremacy was still the order of the day, in 1908 a search was on for a great white hope to regain the title. After beating Burns, Johnson remained in Australia for a few days, enjoying several celebrations and gifts, including a special dog race in his honor. When we return, Jack Johnson defends his title against the Michigan assassin Stanley Ketchum when Big Fights Boxing Hour continues.